is going on in this scene? It is so powerful. It's confusing, but it's confusing in this different way, and that doesn't affect how powerful it is. Let me ask you this. What would you say is the feeling this scene conveys? For most scenes, it's pretty easy to answer that question, but here it's like, well, sadness doesn't really encompass it. Although it is sad. It's shocking, but not scary. It's disturbing, but being disturbed isn't usually this overwhelming of an experience. It's confusing, but the confusing part is almost more when you start to understand what's going on. Which, like, what does that even mean? It gets more confusing when you start understanding it. So a lot to unpack here. What goes into a scene like this? And what I thought was happening here when I first saw it was, oh, it's just sudden, super weird, dark stuff. But once I started thinking into it, once I found a few more scenes like this, and I started thinking into the building blocks of these types of scenes, there's a really cool unity here. It's attacking a single goal from many different angles. Cursed scenes is what I'm calling this category. I think that conveys the feeling well. And those feelings themselves, I'm not going to focus here on what they are as much. I think that's the fairly straightforward part of all this. Yes, the scene should be sad and shocking and horrifying, but like I mentioned before, these scenes are somehow more than the sum of those components. I want to figure out how that happens, which we'll see has more to do with the how than the what. So that's going to be the focus here. And something else about these scenes is that they're not that common. I'm only going to talk about two today. The Hold the Door scene from Game of Thrones and the Monkey Bomb Worked scene from Arcane, which, by the way, isn't even really a full scene. It's introducing a full scene. That full scene, we can easily name that emotion. It's a tragic scene. But this moment, which is just the setup, it has that curse energy. It's more than just sad. We're caught off guard. We're confused, even though it is making sense. But that said, the Hold the Door scene also isn't really its own scene. It's not the main thing happening there. The main thing is Bran escaping. And that's actually the first ingredient here. What is shocking in these scenes is the content of the scene, but these scenes come out of nowhere. They interrupt other important scenes. And that abruptness is embellishing the emotional impact the cursed scene itself will have. Here we have shock as a big part of what's happening. Actually, let's get a bit more specific. Disorientation is what's happening. Shock is, oh my god. Disorientation is, huh? It's, wait, what is going on? That embellishes the primary source of disorientation, i.e. the content of the scene. So that's preliminary. That's how we set these scenes up. But what's happening in the scene itself? So it seems, oh my god, abrupt pacing shift.
You know, I'm not trying to show any talent. All I'm trying to do is have some fun. This is when I get together with friends and we go home and I have some fun. And I just wanted to make believe you're my friends and we're having a good time.
So I lied earlier. There is a third cursed scene I want to talk about today. And this is so cursed, but it is so unbelievably genius as well. So not a cursed scene from fiction. This is a cursed stand-up routine. You should absolutely watch this yourself. It's the weirdest experience. It starts like this. Remember, this is Andy Kaufman, one of the greatest comedians of his generation. So he comes on stage and says this.
Up to now, you know, every time I've appeared someplace, I always do that foreign man character that I do. And I'd like to branch out more, you know, just do myself. So.
And then he starts doing his act. And the jokes are not funny.
Bottom of the fifth and the bags are loaded.
And no one knows what's going on. There's uncomfortable laughter because obviously this has to be a bit, except it just keeps going.
Yes, now you can get the great hits of all time. Yes, you can get the great hits of Babe Ruth. He had a lot of big hits.
And it's not like these are anti-jokes, it's bad jokes. It's bad delivery. He's really just kind of bombing.
And when I went to see Earthquake, when I walked in the
and it just keeps going, and the audience is getting restless, and they start booing him.
I said to him, what are those called? He says, oh, that's the furries with the fringe on top.
And I think they almost do it to get him to break because they know it's a bit. It has to be a bit, right? It's going to be like, haha, I was bombing on purpose. Except that's just not what happens. He doesn't break. He just starts getting really sad and visibly uncomfortable. And then this happens.
I think it's not working. So I think thank you very much. And I'm sorry. And there's other acts. And so I really shouldn't have done this.
And he leaves. He goes off stage. And everyone waiting for him to break and to say this is a bit, we don't get that. It just ends. But then he comes back and we're like, okay, now we're going to get the big reveal, except no, it gets worse.
And I just wanted to make believe you were my friends and we're having a good time. It doesn't work.
And at this point, the audience is like totally in shock. What the heck is happening? It is uncomfortable for everyone. And it's kind of pathetic. It's sad. There's no humor in any of it. You can kind of feel the audience feeling trapped, and you kind of feel trapped watching it also. And then this happens.
I have no business being here, and I want to thank you all for showing me where I'm at. You really showed me where I'm at today. I was just trying to do my best. Ruin everything. Every time I'm trying to go wrong, I don't try to do my best. Thank you very much.
Okay, so you're just left with this feeling of, what? It's like this weird mix of disgust and admiration. Bombs for 6 minutes, embarrasses himself on stage just so he could create this uniquely weird moment as the finale. Is that actually what just happened? And yeah, he brought those bongos on stage in the first few seconds of the act, but of course we forgot all about that. And that is our second ingredient here. There has to be an extremely conspicuous setup, followed by a long delay. We meet Hodor here in the show, season 1, episode 4.
Hodor.
In the books, he's mentioned even earlier in the story, along with his strange little quirk.
Hodor.
The Hold the Door scene happens 5 seasons later. So we get 5 years of hearing Hodor.
Hodor.
No explanation. And after a couple years have passed, we either give up on ever getting an explanation, or we forget that there could be an explanation.
Hodor.
We see Andy Kaufman very conspicuously position his bongos, and then we're not even thinking about them when we get the resolution. With Hodor, we really notice that this character only says one weird word.
Hodor.
We can't not notice it. But when this escape sequence starts, it is the last thing we're thinking about. And granted, they drop hints, they do a little setup earlier in the season, but even that is distanced from this scene. This is essentially a Chekhov's gun situation. Details that seem to serve less essential purposes, part of the setting, part of characterization, a minor character goal. These details end up playing radically different and more important roles than we were led to assume. And that abruptness, this reintroduction to this detail we thought was meaningless, that bait and switch, that matches the bait and switch of the scene itself, the content of the scene. This is not just a big exciting escape scene, this is the sum total of Hodor's entire life up until now. This is not Powder realizing what she's done, this is the beginning of her descent into madness, the beginning of the road from Powder to Jinx. This is not a comedian having a meltdown, it's whatever the fuck this was. So delivering a climax to a different arc out of nowhere is the ingredient here, and this can't just be a climax to any arc. There is a huge discrepancy in depth of the scene we expect and what we get. These scenes we expect, Bran's escape, Powder's grief, very simple scenes, very straightforward. We know the road we're on, we're driving along the surface, and then it's like a sinkhole opens up underneath us, and we plunge into the depths. Meaning the topic here is the place of conveying information in arcs. The audience will be in information gathering mode at certain parts throughout the story. Act 1, we know there's a lot to learn. We are in that mode, we are taking things in. Beginnings of individual scenes, we gotta figure out what's going on. Ends of scenes, how will this play out, what effect will this have. When we're in the middle of like a fight scene with henchmen, we are not in information gathering mode. When we're in the middle of a chase scene running from goons, or when we're in the middle of a different character reacting to the last scene, we're not expecting the bottom to drop out of an arc we thought we understood, and to suddenly have to play catch up. Wait, what is happening? It's a bait and switch with the amount of depth we're expecting, and that comes along with a sudden, unexpected, pressing need to think and understand. Something in this story is a lot different and a lot more complex than we thought. This was not a comedian bombing, it was a comedian using the intricacies of what makes comedy fail, all these little details and delivery and timing, mannerisms and what makes a believably bad joke, all this to lead you down a road to an utterly unique entertainment experience. This wasn't your average girl with insecurities, this was a monster. This wasn't just a speech quirk, this is the triumph of a strange, simple, admirable life. There's thematic stuff involved, the suffering of the honorable, huge Game of Thrones theme. There's lore stuff involved, all the stuff with Bran and Morgan, and that's the next ingredient, and this is probably the most important element. This isn't a scene that's hard to make sense of. It is a scene that does not make sense, but in a specific way. On a micro level, something is not connecting here. The pieces don't fit together. On a macro level, a thematic level, character arc more broadly, it makes total sense. It cannot be more fitting. This transition with the bongos, it actually makes zero sense. But knowing Andy Kaufman, it makes so much more sense this would be something weird and genius than what I thought this was, which was a great comedian telling awful jokes and just bombing for some reason. This girl is loving and adorable and innocent, but we know she's jinxed. It does not make sense to us when we see pure innocent Powder having this moment of pride here. Now, after this happened, it doesn't make sense. Her lack of reaction to realizing what she just did doesn't make sense. Her lashing out against Vi doesn't make sense. For Powder, for Jinx, it makes total sense. And this is what the Hodor scene does the best out of all three scenes in my opinion. The lore stuff here is purposely a total mess. This is not Back to the Future setting up a firm rule with time travel that the whole movie is based on, but then accidentally breaking that rule in the same movie. No, Game of Thrones purposely creates a paradoxical time loop and then leaves it. Bran can only warg into Hodor because he's the simple-minded giant, but he became the simple-minded giant because Bran warged into him too hard in the past? Or not? I mean, there's like a dozen ways of explaining what's going on in the scene. What is causing the seizure? Is Bran warging into present Hodor or past Hodor? Or is he not warging into him at all? Is past Hodor somehow seeing Bran in the scene? Or is Bran not involved in any of this at all? Is it present Hodor having such an intense moment that it breaks the time barriers? You can look for answers here after the fact, just like you can absolutely come up with explanations for Powder's moment and Andy's moment, but the scene is presented purposely as a scene that does not make sense, that we are left not confused by, because it does make so much sense on a thematic level. This is the price of honor. On a character level, Hodor is that devoted to Bran. And that is the most brilliant part of all, is how do you make a scene that already doesn't make sense make even less sense by making it not confusing? That blows my mind. And then last ingredient, very simple, we gotta end now, before we can think into it much more, before we've left that emotional state this has put us in. Arcane does extend the scene to curse it even more, but overall we end abruptly as we began. So what is the commonality here? Here are 6 ingredients. 1, curse scenes interrupt other scenes. 2, any setup comes very early, very conspicuously, followed by a long delay. 3, the content of these scenes is a climax to a different arc coming out of nowhere. 4, there's a bait and switch also with the depth, both compared to the arc we switched from and the depth of the element itself in question. 5, the scene we get doesn't make sense, but in a way that doesn't confuse us, which itself is confusing. And 6, we end suddenly. So what's beautiful here is that every element aids that same impact of disorientation. This is not depending just on the content of the scene to produce an emotional impact. It is using everything. Every tool we can get our hands on. Pacing, where the scene starts, where it ends. Audience experience, what the audience remembers, what they forget. Audience expectations, both of this scene and of the setup scene, scenes that had nothing to do with this from earlier in the story. We're using how deep the story itself is. We're using how much sense the story makes. We're messing with dials here that we rarely even consider could be story tools. So the lesson here is do this with every scene if you can. Not with disorientation specifically, with whatever emotional impact you're going for. If you have a sad scene, don't depend entirely on the content of that scene making that sad. Aid that sadness impact with the pacing. Find things you can do with previous scenes to aid it. Find ways to make the actual sadness of the content an even sadder type of sadness than just normal sad. A place where it seems that people have gotten overall good with this is with exciting scenes. Take a fight scene, writers and directors and cinematographers know that action per se doesn't give you that much to work with on a story level. So we use certain types of camera work to aid the excitement. We use fast, abrupt pacing. We use exciting music. We throw in other emotions we associate with excitement, humor, empowerment, fun, because a fun excitement is an even more exciting form of excitement than normal excitement. Make use of every tool. Make use of tools that you don't even think are tools. Make use of scenes that you think have nothing to do with the scene. That's what this is a beautiful, horrible example of. And with curse scenes specifically, if you can find one of those rare opportunities to have one of these scenes in your story, they stand out so much. People remember scenes like this. This is the type of scene that you're like lying in bed and you're still thinking about. And all the ingredients we mentioned, the rules, the methods, as always, doesn't need to follow all these rules. Even just having these emotions themselves is important to just keep in mind for your stories. We get fixated on the same standard set of emotions we see in every movie. We got our exciting scenes, our sad scenes, our touching scenes, empowerment, romance, triumph, determination, fear, humor. All fine, all good, but if you find an opportunity to make a story that's about confusing your audience in interesting ways, disturbing them, or producing unusual types of excitement, unusual types of sadness, of humor, of horror, that will stand out. You often find these interesting emotions in short fiction. Horror of all kinds is filled with these moments. Cosmic horror is an example of an entire genre that was kind of built on this cursed set of emotions. So these opportunities may not come up very often, but it's important, I think, creatively to just leave that door open. Subscribe to the channel if you like. I love these curse scenes. Tell me if you have any favorites of your own. Like I said, they're pretty rare, so I'd love to hear about more. Also, Game of Thrones. I have mixed feelings about the series if you couldn't tell, but there are things I absolutely love about the first season. No, I'm kidding. There's lots of things I love about the show, about the books. Might make a book-based video on how George Martin writes children. Arya and Tywin, that's a fascinating relationship I have a lot of thoughts about. But let me know if you have any ideas for Game of Thrones content you'd like to see. I am open. Shout out to the patrons, specifically Daniel Shambovsky. Support the channel there if you wish. Subscribe for more content, shorts on Wednesdays, Sundays for long content, and thanks for watching.